everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and this is 40 years of great games. We are going through the years. We've been going through them 3 at a time, but now we're going to slow down and go down to 2 years at a time as we take a look at the best games that came out for each year in the board game and card game category. So here today we're talking about 1983 to 1984. I was still quite a young child at this point, but there are some great games that came out during this time, and there's some okay games. Number 10 is a game that's still being produced today in many different forms, and that is the classic dexterity game, Jenga. There's all sorts of different ways people play Jenga. They even now have giant Jenga out there. There's Uno Jenga, there's all sorts. And whether you love or hate the game, there's no denying its influence, especially on the dexterity genre. And if I see it sitting somewhere, I'll play it. Why not? Number 9 is Topple. Another dexterity game. I like this one a little bit better than Jenga, where basically the board is floating around and moving, and you're trying to, not make it, topple. Number 8 is Octiles. This is an abstract strategy game. Today's Suro is a very popular game where you're connecting paths. Octiles did it a little bit first, and you had these pieces that you needed to move across the paths. There's some really beautiful wooden versions of this game in existence, and I highly recommend it, Octiles. Number 7 is another abstract game, kind of dexterity, called Exit. And it wasn't a perfect game. They could probably use a little bit of fixing up, but essentially you were sliding the board around, trying to get a piece to exit off the board. If you do so, you win. And that's just a nice, cool concept. I played it quite a few times when I owned it. Number 6 is a classic game that every boy or girl my age has probably played at some point or other, and that was Crossbows and Catapults. This is a game in which you are physically shooting things across the table and trying to blow up your opponent's castle. Weapons and Warriors was a very similar game to this, but Crossbows and Catapults did it best and first with the discs and the different weapons and the spring-loaded pieces that when you hit them, they exploded. It was an amazing time. I still remember thinking this was the coolest thing I had seen as a kid, and I still think that now when I see it. Number 5 is Rage. This came out in 1983. Rage is a trick-taking style game in which each turn of the game, you have fewer and fewer and fewer cards until the end round where most people play. The card is stuck to your head and you can't see it. A lot of fun involved in this game. There have been better trick-taking games made since this era, but it still works well, and I think it's still in production. That's Rage. Number 4 is the spy deduction game, Heimlich and Company. Heimlich and Company, you are essentially moving these different spies around the board, and you're watching everybody what piece they move because you're trying to figure out who everyone is. You're trying to get your pieces on the right places to score points, and you're watching as a movement. Oh, that's obvious. You move that piece to a good spot, then that must be you. Or were you just trying to trick me? Rio Grande added some special abilities to the game, which I think also improved it. But the base game itself is it's a lighter deduction game, but one that I really like. Number 3 is Eat Poop You Cat. You may be thinking, I've never heard of this game. Well, Eat Poop You Cat was eventually, many years later, over 20 years later, turned into a game called Telestrations. You may have heard of that one, which is like telephone. Eat Poop Your Cat was mostly played with paper and pencil at this point in time, but it is still a classic game and one of the funniest games you will ever play. Number 2, Scotland Yard. I was just in the United Kingdom, and as I traveled around on bus and by taxi and by subway, I thought of that game because that game brings that to life, the transportation system of London. As one person is Mr. X and everyone else is trying to find them. There's a lot of everyone versus one player games these days, but Scotland Yard was one of the first that did an excellent job at bringing that genre to life in the early 80s. And number 1 is a party game, one of my favorite party games, and that is Balderdash. Balderdash, a word I didn't even know what it meant until I got this game, which means just sounds of lies as you tell them to other people, where there was a word that no one knew. And then you have everyone would write down a definition, and one person would write down the correct definition. You shuffle them, and everyone tries to guess the correct definition. A good game that usually turns silly and idiotic as time goes by, but a ton of fun and causes a lot of laughter. This game did exist before then. It was called the dictionary game or whatever, but Balderdash did a great job at putting a lot of different words into a box, so you didn't have to find a dictionary, and you just had a bunch of really obscure, cool words. Those are my top 10 games from 1983 to 1984. Next time we go to the 85 and 86. Until then, I'm Tom Vasel. This has been the best games of the last 40 years, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at DicetowerNetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.